Imagine standing in a high-stakes interrogation room. Across the table sits someone who knows every weakness, every insecurity, and every hidden wound you've ever tried to bury. But here is the critical part. They didn't discover those vulnerabilities by accident. You handed them the blueprint. When you deal with a narcissist, you aren't dealing with an ordinary person having a bad day or going through a bout of selfishness. You're dealing with an individual operating on a deeply ingrained, almost mechanical, behavioral loop. Every word, every strategic pause, and every explosive attack is designed with one deliberate objective: to force you out of your baseline and into emotional dysregulation. Why do they want to hurt you so deeply? Why does it feel so targeted, so personal, and so utterly relentless? The moment you assume their behavior is driven by normal human emotional logic, you lose the game. You begin searching for a resolution that doesn't exist. You ask yourself, what did I do wrong? How can I explain this to them so they understand? But when you analyze their actions through behavioral science and threat profiling, the reality becomes glaringly obvious. They aren't trying to fix the relationship. They aren't trying to communicate. They are executing a survival strategy. Their dynamic with you depends entirely on leverage and emotional disruption. To a narcissist, your composure, your independence, and your inner stability represent a direct threat to their constructed ego. If you remain calm, grounded, and self-assured, it exposes the massive void they carry inside themselves every single second of the day. To eliminate that threat, they must break your composure. They need to see you hurt, confused, angry, or pleading, because the moment you break, they regain the illusion of control. If you have ever felt like you were losing your grip on reality while trying to figure out why someone you cared about seemed determined to dismantle you from the inside out, pay close attention. In the next few minutes, we are going to break down the exact psychological mechanics behind why a narcissist targets you, how they extract emotional real estate, and, most importantly, the precise behavioral shifts you must execute today to neutralize their power over you completely. By the time this presentation ends, you will never view their attacks the same way again. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. The person who hurt you didn't do it because you failed them. They did it because you were readable, predictable, and available. Right now, millions of people are walking around in a fog, desperately trying to solve a puzzle that has missing pieces on purpose. They spend months, sometimes years, analyzing text messages, replaying arguments in their heads, and asking, why would someone who claimed to care about me want to cause this much pain? If you leave this room or close this video right now, you will keep running that same script. You will keep trying to apply human logic to a predatory behavioral pattern, and you will stay trapped in the cycle of emotional defense. Stay right here, because in the next few minutes, I am going to give you the exact behavioral blueprint of what is actually happening behind their eyes. And once you see the pattern, you can never be manipulated by it again. To understand why they hit so hard, you have to look at what they are protecting. At the center of a narcissist's psychology is not an overinflated sense of self. It is a complete, total absence of baseline self-worth. It is a vacuum. To survive, they build a rigid, artificial, external identity. Think of it like a thin glass shield. Now, when a healthy person encounters a conflict, their internal baseline absorbs the shock. They process it, adjust, and move on. But a narcissist has no internal cushion. Every piece of feedback, every boundary you set, and every moment you display true independence hits that glass shield directly. When they attack you, it is not a calculated display of superior strength. It is a panic response. It is a desperate, baseline attempt to keep their own psychological structure from collapsing. When you are grounded, calm, and thriving, your high internal status, visually and emotionally, reminds them of their own low internal status. The gap between your reality and their facade creates severe psychological friction inside them. How do they close that gap? They don't raise themselves up. They don't have the internal resources for that. Instead, they pull you down. The moment you react, the moment you raise your voice, cry, demand an explanation, or lose your composure, they register a win. Why? Because you just handed them control of your emotional state. Your pain becomes their proof that they hold the power in the room. Have you ever wondered why their insults and low blows hit the exact spots you are most sensitive about? It feels almost supernatural, but it's pure behavioral observation. Narcissists are exceptionally skilled micro-observers. They aren't empathetic, but they are hypervigilant. They notice which topics make your vocal pitch rise, when your eye contact breaks, what personal stories you share when you are trying to be vulnerable. When you offer vulnerability to a narcissist, you think you are building intimacy. In reality, you are handing them data. They store those micro data points away, and the moment their glass shield feels threatened, they load that data and fire it straight back at you. So how do you stop the cycle? You do not fight back with anger. Fire on fire creates chaos, and chaos is an environment where they thrive. You win by changing the rules of engagement through 3 clear steps. Adopt a flat baseline. Strip your body language, tone, and facial expressions of all high-energy cues. Keep your voice steady, slow, and low in pitch. Starve the feedback loop. When they throw a targeted attack, offer 0 emotional hook. Simple, non-committal responses like, "That's an interesting perspective," or "You're entitled to your opinion." Close the interaction without giving them fuel. Reclaim your data. Stop explaining your motives, stop defending your character, and stop trying to get them to acknowledge your perspective. Silence on your personal details is your ultimate leverage. When you remove the emotional payload from their attacks, their mechanism fails. The mirror turns back on them, and they are forced to deal with the one thing they fear most, their own internal reality. Recognize the pattern, control your baseline, and step completely out of the frame. To understand why a narcissist attacks with such relentless precision, you have to dissect the fundamental illusion of their internal world. To the untrained eye, a narcissist appears confident, dominant, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. They speak with absolute certainty, demand unyielding attention, and treat the people around them as subordinate players in a script they alone control. But behavioral profiling reveals an entirely different picture beneath that posture. The aggression, the sudden shifts into cold cruelty, and the desperate need to inflict pain do not stem from a position of strength or genuine self-esteem. They are driven by an all-consuming, terrifying core insecurity that governs every breath they take. At the center of the narcissist's psychological structure is a complete absence of an authentic self. Most people build an internal baseline over time, a grounded sense of identity rooted in their values, experiences, emotional resilience, and self-awareness. When an emotionally healthy person experiences failure, criticism, or rejection, their internal core acts as a buffer. It absorbs the impact, allowing them to reflect, adapt, and remain stable. The narcissist possesses no such core. Inside them sits an intense psychological void, a vacuum characterized by shame, inadequacy, and a profound fear of irrelevance. Because they cannot generate self-worth from within, they are forced to construct a grand, artificial shell to present to the outside world. This constructed persona is not a preference. It is a vital survival mechanism. Because this external persona is synthetic, it is extraordinarily fragile. It requires constant, uninterrupted external validation, what behavioral scientists refer to as narcissistic supply, to remain intact. Every person in their orbit is evaluated strictly by how well they maintain, validate, or serve this fragile illusion. The moment you fail to fuel that narrative, whether by setting a simple boundary, offering constructive feedback, displaying independent success, or simply failing to react with enthusiasm, you stop acting as a mirror for their grandiosity. To the narcissist, this isn't just a minor disagreement or a difference of opinion. It is a catastrophic threat to their constructed reality. When that glass shield of their false identity develops even the slightest crack, the deep core insecurity they have spent their entire life running from threatens to flood their consciousness. The feeling of shame that arises in these moments is so overwhelming and dangerous to their psyche that they will do anything to reject it. They cannot process shame internally, so their mind instinctively converts that raw, agonizing vulnerability into outward rage and calculated malice. The attack is born. When a narcissist seeks to hurt you, they are not acting out of a logical assessment of your perceived flaws or mistakes. They are executing a defensive maneuver designed to eject their internal shame out of their system and force it into yours. By provoking you, belittling your character, or targeting your deepest insecurities, they transfer their internal chaos onto you. The moment they see you wounded, confused, defending yourself, or breaking down emotionally, their core insecurity is temporarily quieted. Your obvious pain becomes the tangible evidence they need to convince themselves that they remain powerful, in control, and superior. The attack was never really about you. You were simply the target standing close enough to absorb the blast of their psychological survival mechanism. The status equilibrium mechanism is the underlying psychological force that drives every power struggle you will ever experience with a narcissist. To grasp how this works, you must first throw out the idea that interactions with a narcissist are built on mutual communication or connection. They operate strictly on a cold, transactional matrix of status and leverage. In any given social ecosystem, a narcissist evaluates every room, every conversation, and every dynamic through a single binary lens. Who is holding the high ground and who is yielding? Because their entire identity depends on maintaining a state of perceived dominance, your personal equilibrium, your calm, your independence, and your emotional stability is experienced by them as an active, direct threat to their standing. When you walk into an interaction grounded, self-assured, and emotionally secure, your stable internal state acts as a stark, unforgiving mirror. It highlights the massive contrast between your genuine composure and their fragile, artificially constructed persona. In behavioral dynamics, high internal stability radiates high status. You do not need to brag, assert dominance, or demand attention. Your quiet composure naturally anchors the room. To a narcissist, whose entire psychological survival relies on being the central, dominant figure, watching you maintain that unshakable baseline induces immediate, intense psychological friction. They perceive your calm not as peace, but as an aggressive act of non-compliance. It forces them into a state of panic because it signals that you are outside of their emotional orbit and therefore beyond their control. This is where the mechanism of status equilibrium activates. Because a narcissist lacks the internal capacity to raise their own true self-worth to match your level of genuine stability, they are left with only one operational choice. They must systematically degrade yours. They cannot pull themselves up, so they must pull you down. The primary tool they use to accomplish this shift in status is deliberate, engineered emotional volatility. They will intentionally deploy subtle insults, backhanded compliments, sudden coldness, bring up past traumas you shared in confidence, or introduce absurd, false accusations. The objective of these maneuvers is not to resolve a real issue or express genuine feelings. It is a calculated effort to throw your nervous system out of balance and force you into a reactive state. The moment you lose your composure, the exact instant your voice raises in defense, tears fill your eyes, or you begin frantically explaining yourself, the status dynamic immediately recalibrates in their favor. To the narcissist, your emotional dysregulation is the ultimate payoff. When you react to their bait, you signal to them that they possess the master remote control to your internal state. You have effectively surrendered your high status and placed yourself in a subordinate, reactive position. Seeing you disoriented, hurt, or furious provides them with a profound sense of relief because it restores their illusion of absolute control over the dynamic. Your breakdown becomes the stabilizing fuel that re-anchors their fragile ego, bringing their perceived status back into balance at the direct expense of your emotional sanity. The mirroring trap represents one of the most insidious psychological mechanisms in any interaction with a narcissist, primarily because it weaponizes your best human qualities against you. When you enter a conflict with a normal, emotionally mature person, the implicit agreement is that both parties are operating with an underlying goal of mutual understanding, resolution, and connection. You naturally deploy empathy, active listening, logical reasoning, and vulnerability to bridge the gap. You assume that if you can just explain your perspective clearly enough, show genuine pain, or demonstrate willingness to compromise, the other person will meet you halfway. But when you apply these healthy conversational mechanics to a narcissist, you walk straight into an engineered trap designed to harvest your own efforts and turn them into weapons against you. Narcissists process communication through an entirely different cognitive framework. Where you see an opportunity for connection, they see a tactical interface. When you express genuine empathy, attempt to see things from their perspective, or admit a minor fault in an effort to show goodwill, the narcissist does not view this as a gesture of maturity or reconciliation. Instead, their hyper-vigilant behavioral system registers your empathy as weakness and an admission of guilt. Every vulnerable detail you share, every logical concession you make, and every emotional reaction you expose is instantly collected as raw data. Rather than using your openness to de-escalate the tension, they mirror your words, twist your logic, and feed your own vulnerability back to you in a restructured format designed to maximize your disorientation and self-doubt. This dynamic becomes particularly destructive when you attempt to use logic and facts to resolve a dispute. In a standard argument, logic acts as a neutral baseline that brings clarity. But to a narcissist, logic threatens their constructed narrative of absolute perfection and control. When you present clear evidence, timeline consistency, or undeniable facts that contradict their stance, you create severe cognitive dissonance within them. Because they cannot accept being wrong or held accountable without experiencing a catastrophic blow to their ego, they immediately engage in psychological mirroring and projection. They will take the exact behaviors, motives, and deceitful tactics they are actively using against you and accuse you of employing them. If they are gaslighting you, they will claim you are confused and manipulating reality. If they are acting out of irrational anger, they will accuse you of being emotionally unstable and unhinged. By mirroring your accusations and weaponizing your empathy, the narcissist successfully shifts the entire focus of the interaction away from their own conduct and onto your defensive response. You suddenly find yourself trapped in an exhausting loop, spending hours defending your integrity, clarifying basic facts, and reassuring them of your intentions, completely forgetting the original boundary you set or the issue you tried to address. Your drive for empathy forces you to continually grant them the benefit of the doubt, while their tactical mirroring ensures that every attempt you make to heal the rupture only deepens your confusion and solidifies their leverage over the conversation. To understand how a narcissist selects and dismantles a target, you must abandon the common misconception that they seek out weak, fragile, or low-value individuals. In reality, behavioral profiling reveals that narcissists perform a subtle, continuous form of subconscious profiling to identify targets with high emotional real estate. They are drawn to individuals who possess abundant reserves of empathy, conscientiousness, deep loyalty, and a strong innate drive to heal, fix, or fixate on the needs of others. These are not character flaws, they are high-value human traits. However, in the hands of a skilled emotional predator, these exact virtues become the primary vulnerabilities leveraged to establish and maintain absolute psychological dominance. This selection process happens early in the dynamic through a series of micro-tests and subconscious observations. Long before a narcissist ever launches a direct attack, they are actively gathering data on how you respond to small boundary testing. They observe your vocal cadence when you feel uncomfortable, how quickly you apologize to keep the peace, and how far you will bend your own standards to accommodate someone else's mood. If you demonstrate a high tolerance for self-blame and an eagerness to see the best in people despite contradictory behavior, you flag yourself as an ideal target. The narcissist recognizes that your internal operating system is wired to look inward when something goes wrong. They know that when conflict arises, your instinct will not be to walk away or hold them accountable, but to try harder, reflect deeper, and fix the breakdown. Once a narcissist completes this initial profiling, they systematically begin weaponizing your own traits against you. They utilize your high level of empathy as a doorway to bypass your natural psychological defenses. For instance, your desire to understand their past traumas, bad days, or explosive outbursts is turned into an open invitation for them to evade all personal accountability. Your conscientiousness, the part of you that takes pride in being fair, rational, and responsible, is exploited to make you feel perpetually guilty for setting basic human boundaries. Every time you attempt to hold them responsible for their actions, they trigger your innate fear of being unkind, unfair, or selfish, causing you to second-guess your own reality and withdraw your boundaries. The ultimate objective of this subconscious profiling and weaponization is to establish total leverage over your decision-making and emotional baseline. By studying your specific profile, the narcissist learns exactly which emotional buttons to press to trigger an immediate, predictable reaction. They know precisely which insecurity to tap to make you seek their approval, and which silent treatment tactic will induce maximum anxiety in you. They map out your emotional terrain so thoroughly that they can manipulate your state without raising their voice or making a physical move. You become locked in a dynamic where your highest personal qualities are converted into the very chains that bind you to their control, leaving you completely drained while they systematically feed off your emotional stability. To break free from a narcissist's cycle of control, you must execute a complete tactical pivot away from emotional engagement and towards strict baseline management. Neutralization is not about fighting back, winning an argument, or convincing the narcissist to acknowledge your pain or see the truth. Attempting to defeat a narcissist through traditional conflict simply feeds the dynamic, because high-energy resistance still signals to them that they possess the leverage to dictate your internal state. True behavioral neutralization occurs when you render yourself completely unreadable, unpredictable, and devoid of emotional payload, effectively dismantling the feedback loop they rely on for leverage. The primary operational shift requires adopting what behavioral profilers refer to as a flat baseline. A narcissist relies heavily on reading microexpressions, shifts in vocal pitch, body language tension, and rapid verbal defenses to measure the impact of their attacks. When they throw an insult, make a passive-aggressive remark, or stage a sudden crisis, they are actively fishing for a neurological reaction. To neutralize this, you must consciously train your physical and vocal delivery to reflect total neutrality. You keep your voice low in pitch, slow down your cadence, maintain relaxed facial muscles, and avoid defensive posturing. When they hit you with a targeted attack, your physical presence communicates zero internal disruption, completely starving them of the emotional feedback they require to feel in control. In tandem with maintaining a flat baseline, you must systematically strip the conversation of all informative data through emotional flatlining. Narcissists operate on the data you provide, your explanations, your personal values, your insecurities, and your justifications. The moment you attempt to explain yourself, you hand them raw material to twist and weaponize against you. Neutralization demands that you replace explanations with brief, non-committal, closed statements that offer no surface area for an argument. Phrasing such as, "You are entitled to your opinion. That is an interesting perspective," or a simple, calm, "I hear you," closes the conversational loop instantly. You do not validate their false claims, but you explicitly refuse to debate them, leaving their provocative statements hanging in empty air without traction. Ultimately, the power of neutralization lies in reclaiming absolute authority over your internal baseline and revoking their access to your personal narrative. You stop treating their behavior as a mystery that needs to be solved or a relationship that needs to be fixed, and begin treating it as a predictable mechanical pattern that requires strict boundary containment.